First and most importantly, there is not a standard system for coding, which may actually at times be confusing and make you feel like you don't know what you're doing. But it's important to remember that the codes that you use and the process that you use will depend on your research questions. What is it that you want to know about your participants? Or what phenomenon are you trying to explain? Or why? Once you have a handle on that, the what and the why, the method or the how or the data collection and the analysis is where your true process of deliberate creation happens, where you get to create your codes based on your research questions, based on your theoretical framework, your worldview, your literature search, and most importantly, from what your research participants are telling you. You now get to sort it all out and make some interpretations about it, make sense of it. And you do this through an iterative process of intuitive and analytical thinking, which requires your mind and your imagination to think metacognitively and sometimes abstractly. And if you're imaginative enough, you might even have moments of true insight. And the truly great thing about qualitative research and design is that you get more flexibility in how you choose to sample your participants and ask your questions and collect your information. And that opens up so many more possible ways to analyze your research and string connections together in different ways through an iterative process of logic and intuition. So there are more chances for serendipity, more chances for spontaneous insights to occur. But we will try to simplify this process using a 3-step approach. The first step is the interpretation of text fragment. This is where we will read text fragment multiple times over and over and over and over again, but we will ask ourselves what we think is going on in this segment. And we will want to read the segment of the text and read our research question many times. And we want to reflect on and we'll want to review the literature and think how the nurses we observed and interviewed, and we'll want to think about their communication styles and how they fit with the research questions, and then how they fit with what we learned about Laughlin's style of theory and symbolic transformation through body and movement. And then we're going to think about not only that, but how did that fit with the literature? And we're not trying to just do that, but we're also trying to see how that fits with what we think about the observations and what we think about what they said in the interviews. But even more interestingly, we want to see if we can add to the theory. We want to see if we can add to this theory other styles of communication. Or what about deviant cases? So that means like other things that didn't fit with Laughlin's theory. We add other things that might not fit with what Laughlin already said. Deviant cases are interesting because they can add entirely new areas for research and discovery. The second step, this is where we want to compare our interpretations of our readings. And then this is going to involve some various types of reasoning strategies. And then what we're going to do is we're going to want to apply these to our coding strategies. And this is where we're going to start thinking about how we're going to code. So there's various ways of coding, and you can choose whichever one you want, but you may want to code from a top-down, a bottom-up, or a combination of lots of ways. So let's think about that right now. So there's a lot of different ways to look at your codes. You can think about your codes from just thinking about you don't have any idea what's going on with your codes, so you're just going to start from a bottom up approach, or you may have some theory about what's going on, and you're going to fit that theory and see and check things against that theory. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. So before we do that, let's just talk about different ways of thinking about coding through reasoning processes. So the first way to think about it is inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning means you have no prior theory or known rules. So we must observe something to determine potential cause and effect type relationships, or at least correlations where we might be able to develop some theory or rules. For example, every time Nurse A said, "I need to give you a shot," all of her nurse's blood pressures went sky high. And when Nurse B said, "I'd like to administer your insulin now," all of her blood pressures for her patients stayed in range. Then this type of observation over and over and over and over again would become an example of inductive reasoning, because after many observations of the same thing, you could start to think that the word shot with the rise in blood pressure meant something. Like the word shot probably meant to those patients something bad, for example. Now, deductive reasoning, as you might guess, is the opposite. It's theory testing. It's testing out a rule, meaning that it's rule-based. So here, we're using a known theoretical framework or a known rule to test out a new hypothesis or a new rule. For example, you might want to test out your new hypothesis here to see if nurses who use the word shot instead of administer insulin when giving their patients insulin had a rise in blood pressures. And the rule you just previously induced. Now, here is the fun part, abductive reasoning. In abductive reasoning, the theory or the rule is known, and the effect is known, but the cause is actually not known. But through knowing the theory and the effect, we can deduce the cause. It's kind of like being Sherlock Holmes. So, this is also called triangulation of data. And as an example, if you walked into a patient's room and saw that their blood pressure had just risen sky high, and you knew they had just received insulin shot by a certain nurse who always used the phrase, "I'm going to give you your shot now," you might abduce the cause for the rise in blood pressure to be the nurse's poor choice of language, and this would be abductive reasoning. So you're using the effect of walking into the room and the known rule that the rise in blood pressure was always caused by this poor choice in language to abduce the cause of the rise in blood pressure. So you're kind of like a detective. That's abductive reasoning. Finally, we're going to use these reasoning processes to start coding. That's the third step, is coding. So the third step is to use inductive coding and deductive coding processes to assign to our codes, to our texts, to our segments of code, until we reach what we call theoretical saturation, which means that we have no more unique data to code. And we've found all of our codes. And then at this point, we will focus on the last, and what I want to tell you here is that we usually tend to focus on the last step, the third step of coding, as the central piece, as the final step of the coding process. But it's really step 1 and 2 that are the most interesting and the most cognitively taxing, that really help us to arrive at these beautiful codes. And this is really concludes this lecture. Thank you.